Hail and well met, and welcome to Dungeon Mastiff, a channel about creating original D&D content right here for you. Please consider supporting us on Patreon at Dungeon Mastiff, or subscribe to let us know you've liked this channel. Alright, today we'll be making a swamp battle map in Dungeondraft, a great piece of software for map creation. Let's dive right in. Here we are on the main screen. Let's go right ahead and select the new option and an A3 map. And while that's loading, let's take a minute to visualize what we think our map's going to look like. Maybe a swamp with some fertile lands around it and some trees and shrubs going for an interesting map. So let's go right ahead and into the terrain brush and grab the water brush. Let's get a nice big circular brush and just block in the shape of a river draining into a pond like a swamp. Not really like a river, more like a stream, a larger stream. We just thinking it out and at a top so it looks like it's coming from somewhere and draining into this small pond like a swamp. And then we'll just do the same for another one on the right hand side of the screen. So it gives the eye a path to follow, if you know what I mean. You know, from left to right, and you can easily tell this is a swamp the way it's going. Pressing the Alt key will allow us to delete some of the water we've already placed down and make the stream a little thinner. And then we can also add a smaller pool in the bottom right hand corner. Maybe make this one on the left a bit larger. How about that? It's great. Now we'll grab a smaller brush, and then we'll just use that to connect these rivers. Doesn't really matter how thick it is, just so long as it's smaller than the original stream type. So that gives the impression that all these pools are interconnected, draining into one another on a marshland, like swamps usually are. And with that same brush, we'll make a smaller pond down the bottom. That's great. Now we'll go into the terrain brush and choose a terrain that looks kind of like what a swamp would be. Maybe the swamp terrain. That kind of looks a bit too splotchy for our taste, so let's go back to the moss we had before. That gives us a nice base for some trees and making some fertile area around this swamp. Great. Now we'll go on to the brush size 2 and actually change that to a 1, and we'll just make the intensity 8 and grab some sand. And if you saw our last video, you'll know that dragging sand around and in a river gives it depth and gives it a quality that, you know, it's been worn away. This grass has been worn away by the passage of the river, and dragging this sand around gives these rivers or swamp ponds a nice natural quality, if you know what I mean. So we just drag that all around and make a nice little shore for this river. All the way around, just like so. Rounding that off to the bottom, and make sure this is a continual shoreline, so you continue this sand trend all the way around. But you know what? This doesn't really look too much like a swamp. Swamps are more muddy, so let's change that sand right ahead to a dirt. And already that's starting to look much better. And on the sides where the dirt is kind of infringing into the water, makes it look a little deeper, more mysterious, which is kind of what we aim for with this swamp. And you'll notice we left the moss on the bottom of the water, because in a swamp, plants are growing everywhere. They're growing on the bottom of these rivers and outside as well, so we don't really want to add any sand to the bottom lest that ruins the effect. Let's grab the swamp terrain, and drag it around on the edge of this dirt. And you'll notice it gives the river, or these swamp ponds actually, more of a three-dimensional quality. As the terrain slopes up, it has not only dirt but swamp, a kind of wet, sticky mud terrain as opposed to just the plain dirt terrain. And dragging that all around and making sure it doesn't infringe too much on the dirt area gives the map a 3D quality that these pools have kind of sunken into the landscape of mire around them. Let's drag that all around, maybe make a little bit of area for some moss, fill it back in with some swamp terrain, and just drag it all around, really. Or where there's dirt, just make a little buttress of swamp terrain. Maybe join it up a bit. It gives this impression of nice little islands in the midst of this mire. And if we grab the path tool, we can start to make some cliffs around the edge of this swamp, you know? Places where trees are higher up and have their roots growing down through this layered effect to the fresh water of the swamp. Because, forgot to double click to end it. Because swamps are so fertile and plants just love to live there. With this cliff, we might just leave a little bit of moss at the edge, give the impression of some grass growing on the swamp side, so people might not know otherwise this is actually a swamp. It might just be a muddy, cliffy area. Making a few other cliffs, we start to get this mountainous mire of swamp, which is really what we were aiming for. How about we look for some nice full trees, because the trees living here, that's a bit too big. The trees living here would have plenty of opportunity to grow big. So let's go onto the scatter tool and just place a bunch of trees around. And what the scatter tool does is it rotates the trees for you instantly. So you don't have to spend ages rotating all these trees manually. The scatter tool is so great and does that already for you. Now, let's grab some logs that might be floating in this water. And we'll go onto the object tool, because the object tool is better at placing individual objects. Put that log right there, maybe grab another one, a floating one, so it already has these effects built into it. That's great. So now, you can tell, with a normal river, it might not have all these, grass at the bottom of it, and logs floating around, and that gives the impression even more that it's a swamp. And putting some ripples underneath this log indicates that it's kind of a shallow water, and that it's bumping up against some other things inside this swamp, or maybe even the bed of the swamp. Let's now look for some shrubs. And if you saw our last video again, you'll know that shrubs help create a 3-layered effect for the forest. Trees, shrubs, and flowers. That's the magic formula we like to use. Putting in at spread 0.5, we can just drag these shrubs around, and Dungeondraft will place them in right for you. And it gives you a natural kind of effect of shrubs, flowering on the edge of this swamp. Just drag them around like so. Maybe a couple of shrubs up there. And now let's grab some flowering shrubs. In the last map, we kind of restricted ourselves to only one kind of shrub. So in this one, I thought maybe we could use kind of different types of shrubs, maybe to give it an interesting quality, so that the eye doesn't just keep looking at the same old bushes. And now we can look for some grass at least. I don't think that'll do for our swamp. Maybe we can grab these leaves. I don't think so. How about instead we search for some flowers, and that kind of completes the effect, if you know what I mean. Grass, shrubs, and flowers, the 3-layered formula for creating an instant forest vegetation in Dungeondraft. Just dragging these flowers around gives the shrubs the quality that there's something growing beneath them, that it's not just them taking up the rich nutrients of this soil. So, since the flowers are smaller and they should be spread more often, we'll just drag them all around, even where the shrubs aren't, to give the soil a fertile look. That's great. Alright. Maybe we'll put some shrubs up there on the cliff. Sorry, I mean some flowers. Just drag them all around and drop them in wherever you think they're needed. That's great. Make sure to save your map. Let's call this one Swamp Battle Map. Excellent. Now, what are we missing? I don't know. I think let's turn the grid on, because it's more of a battle map. And you know what? To make this map more dynamic, let's grab some boulders, so that when your players are fighting in a combat situation, since we designed this to be a battle map, they'll have some cover to hide behind. Great. We want to make these over, so they're over the flowers, so it doesn't look like there's flowers growing on top of these hostile boulders. So if you're using this battle map in a battle situation, you might be able to give your players, as a dungeon master, half cover maybe, or even full cover if they're using the rocks effectively. And for these rocks up on the cliff, boulders I should be saying, because that's what they're called in Dungeondraft. For these boulders on the cliff, a successful DC 16 strength check might be able to push them off onto some adversaries, which would be really cool for a combat situation, and that's kind of what we're aiming for here. Placing some rocks around these bigger boulders gives the effect that it's not just, because boulders rarely come on their own, it gives these boulders the effect that they're part of a grouped system, and placing some rocks at the base of these cliffs also gives that effect, but for the cliff path. Great, I think we're almost done. Let's just save it one more time, and in fact, I think the only thing we're missing is some lighting. So we'll go onto the environment tool and drag the lighting meter down, maybe to a nice turquoise-ish, maybe a bit bluer, because on the last map we did a kind of predominantly green one. That'll do. Great, now we grab some light, and this is the interesting bit. Change the color to blue, and the lighting for this map will allow for, there's no visible torches, so the water will have to illuminate itself, which gives the water an eerie kind of marshy quality. Save it again, and I think we're done. That's great. That's how we build a swamp battle map in Dungeondraft. A custom map, great for combat situations.